Hey there, guys. Welcome to today's episode where we have somebody that's kind of going to give us a bit more of an insight to what the physical element of life is all about, how that relates to then getting peak performance, not only on that physical side, but actually on the mental side also. So these things are definitely paired together. But I'm not the one to tell us about it. I actually have my guest George on today, who's going to tell us everything about it. And hopefully we're going to dive into it in this episode. So my friend, over to you. Give us a quick introduction about yourself, and then let's get into today's episode.
Just want to start off by saying a massive thank you for actually having me on and taking the time to have a chat with me. Massively is appreciated. Cut a long story short, I've done quite a lot over the years in terms of my background and the place that I'm coming from. If I was to summarize it, as I said, I don't want to be sat here all day talking about the different things, but health and fitness started for me in boxing. It was kind of where I started to grow. And I was about 12 years old when I had my first amateur boxing fight. It's where I first started to get this real interest in optimal human health, because I was always a little bit less optimal. I was a little bit more fearful at school, and boxing gave me a vehicle away from that. It was almost like, oh, well, you saw the Muhammad Ali's and, the Mike Tysons, that they were kind of who I first started watching, and they didn't fear anything, surely. And it was that opportunity to kind of, oh, well, could I be like that? And then this kind of sparked a real big insight to me around optimal health, and this kind of real big curiosity around it. That progressed over the years to the point where I started studying alongside my boxing. So I quickly realized that, and I should have realized this sooner. It took me far longer to realize it, but I was actually far more intelligent than I probably was a good boxer, and I was far better at the learning, especially going alongside uni. Like, I'd always get the top grades in absolutely everything, whether that was GCSEs, in college, at university, and even all the way through to my master's degree. It was always top grades throughout, and that was during me boxing. Something that probably should have clicked a bit sooner. So I should have gone, oh, do you know what? It's probably not for me. But yeah, so I'm very thankful of the experiences, because it kind of led me on this path.
Yeah.
When I was 18, so to go back a little bit, I also started coaching. So I was learning sport, coaching, and then boxing myself. The dream was to become a boxing world champion. That was the initial.
Of course.
As everybody, probably footballer, boxing world champion, race car. It's always something on that. Doctor, dentist, it's always something along those lines. But then for me, it just didn't work out. I was unfortunately led by people who weren't actually quite informed by the science when I was a younger boxer. Led to me burning out, overtraining, which probably a lot of dental professionals will be familiar with the term burnout.
Yeah.
If we're relating it to athletes, it's called overtraining syndrome. And that was just it, because I didn't fully understand the science, and the people who were informing me didn't fully understand it as well. That then pushed me further into, right, there's far more for me to understand, which led me on to university, master's degree. I eventually moved away from boxing, coached a little bit of amateur and professional boxing for a while, because I couldn't kind of let go of that identity. And then that's progressed throughout the years. As I said, whilst I was 18 as well, I was also personal training, coaching in the gym alongside all of this. And slowly but surely over the years, as most people know, and most people listening to this podcast, it kind of narrows down. You start niching down into what do you really enjoy day to day. And that's what's happened for me. So I coached elite athletes for a couple of years during my master's degree. I coached amateur and professional boxing from just a boxing coach perspective. I've worked with general health and fitness. I've worked with people who are disabled. I've worked with pretty much every fitness goal you can imagine.
Nice.
To the place where I'm at now, where, again, people who run a business who are listening to this podcast will understand you can't be great at everything. You have to focus on one thing if you want to be exceptional. And that's what's happened. So now for me, it's just my coaching program, The Optimal Achiever. I just work with business leaders now. And the reason I do that is because I want to have a large scale impact, and I help them through three key things. So their physical health, their nutrition, and their mindset related to their health and wellness.
Nice. I like that. I think, we'll get into kind of the business element of things in a bit. I just want to wind it back a little bit. So at uni, just to confirm, so what were you doing? What was the course title, so to speak? And then what did you do in the masters as well?
So my undergrad degree was sports and exercise science, and then my master's degree was strength and conditioning. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with strength and conditioning, it's optimal performance for elite athletes, but it pretty much applies to everybody. Yeah. Whilst I was at uni, I was a sports scholar. So I was a funded athlete because of my success in boxing. So
Nice.
I kind of got exposure during that to psychologists, nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches. I pretty much had a physiotherapist. I had the whole team around me during that time as well.
And what's that like? I mean, you've kind of tasted that success at a sporting level, and you have to transition into that sort of more professional element where you're coaching others and you're building people up. But when you were there yourself on the other end of the scale, so you were the one almost being coached by people to then go out and perform, has that kind of helped you out, that experience of you doing the thing to now coaching the thing?
Massively, because it means you're not just talking out of textbooks, you're talking from actual experience of
Yeah.
you have a real different perspective on things. If you really want to help people, you have to have multiple perspectives. And one of those for me was, it was fantastic going from not understanding, not knowing, to having full understanding. And that process has kind of allowed me to see what people don't see now.
Right. I'm with you. And I think that's something that maybe we need to, I guess, get to grips with, because usually you can take advice from anyone. There's so many coaches online, right? Like you could literally just Google anything and just, yeah, I'm just gonna take advice from the first person I see. But in reality, it's actually so key to understand what that person's actually experienced themselves, their highlights, their lowlights, and then obviously what experience that they've gained from the people that have coached them also. So what would be kind of the biggest take that maybe you've had from somebody that's coached you in the past? I know you mentioned earlier that maybe during your boxing career early on, you might not have been privy to the most scientific coaches, but over your career of boxing, so to speak, what was the biggest piece of advice that you've taken from a coach that's really stuck with you and now you've almost implemented maybe in your business side?
It genuinely was, that hard work pays off. If you put the actions in, the outcomes always come. And if they're not coming, it's just because you're not doing the right actions. And in relation to, in relation to, or you just have to wait a little bit longer. It's one of the two. It's one of the two usually. And in relation to the coaching side of things and not being trained by the right coaches and listening to anybody online, as you mentioned then, because there's so many online coaches, just to kind of protect your listeners from falling victim to some of these people, the way I'd frame it is, if you were a dentist, or if you was somebody who wasn't a dentist and you was finding a dentist, would you listen to somebody who was just qualified to a BTEC standard level of dentistry, which is college standard? Because that top to bottom is a personal training degree, a personal training qualification. It's a level 3, and you've got to ask yourself, would you go to a dentist? However, when it comes to your whole health and wellness and losing weight, becoming in the best physical shape of your life, that's who people go to.
That's so bang on. I love that. I think, using that dental example, and obviously we can use it with anyone's careers, really, is down to experience. People will say, oh, I don't know, I'm paying more money, but you get what you pay for, really, right? And having the experience that you've had, I would quite comfortably say that there's probably not many people out there that have had that experience. As I said, deal with the highs and the lows that you've had to, the experiences that you've had, then translate that into a service. So it is always definitely worth it. So that's great to see. And then obviously, as we said, you've now transitioned that into a service that you provide for people. You've covered your 3 principles, but let's have a deeper dive into that now. So say, for example, there's somebody out there that is looking for that balance between looking after their physical state of mind and their physical performance, their body. For myself, I'll use me as an example, right? So I used to play football at a decent level. I've aged badly, got into bad habits, obviously with studying and whatnot. You find excuses to not have the time, right? So, oh, I'm not going to go to the gym today because I studied for 6 hours, or I'm not going to do this because I did that the other day. We will always find an excuse, right, to not kind of get that physical performance in there as well. I am now struggling with a meniscus issue in my right knee, probably from being overweight. There's all these reasons that kind of come into it that keep us away from the gym or looking after ourselves. But then this kind of then does have an effect on your mental health, right? Because then you look at the mirror and you think, I didn't used to look like that 10 years ago, or I want to look better, I want to perform better, but you can't achieve it. And then it's a vicious cycle and you just get worse and worse and worse. How do we counteract that? How do we actually come out of that rut and then actually look at our physical health as a way to then perform not only physically, but then mentally as well. So you've had experience of bringing people out from the darkness, right? You probably see a lot of people that are struggling in the same kind of mindset that I am. How do you deal with that? How do you pull them out of that and then get them to, as you said, have that peak performance?
So the first thing that I do before I work with anybody is we have a call. Usually lasts between 45 minutes to an hour and a half, just depending
Nice.
on what kind of things we cover. And in that call, it's me taking a deep dive into why this is actually important for you to do. Not because of what you tell me, but we cut what the questions that I use cut through to reality. And it's not my reality. It's not what I think you should be doing. It's your reality. And it's working out, what do you value most in life? What is actually your physical health and wellness, nutrition, all of these kind of things causing you pain around what you value most in life?
Right.
And how would taking that away and improving your health for the long term give you happiness around that? And it's really working that out first, because most people start with, oh, I just want to look a little bit better. And the one thing I always say to people is that if that reason was good enough, you would have already done it. But
So
it's
true.
not, because that's not the reality. So it's really and what I find a lot of people do is subconsciously they escape reality as much as possible. So people get into a rut because they get into a cycle of reaffirming their identity around their current state and escaping it. So using the things, whether it's food, whether it's, oh, that's just me, whether it's, these kind of little phrases, these assigning meaning that, oh, that's just how things are. This is how things are when you age, and it's all these different beliefs that people have. And it's just cutting straight through that. It's like, well, no, let's actually shine a light on reality. What do you really want? And then once we find that, because a lot of people come to me saying, oh, how do I do this? Well, it's like, if we don't have an end goal, how can we possibly reverse engineer a whole process for you to get there? And how do we even know what we need to measure to know if we're being successful? And then once we get that, and don't get me wrong, that it's dynamic. Goals are dynamic. They do change over time, but we definitely need a starting point, and it definitely has to have a big, important reason why behind it. Why actually, when it does get tough, are you going to carry on?
How do you deal with people that, you do these goal setting kind of exercises with them, right? But I always feel we have a tendency, like, I'm speaking maybe from personal experience, but I do see it across the board. We as humans have a tendency to lie a lot, right? When it comes to spilling the beans on what we want, and maybe, as you quite rightly called it, the reality of things. Obviously, we get quite blinded over time as to what reality is and what it isn't. How do you deal with people that are maybe not telling you the full truth and then shape their goals accordingly? Like, can you suss it out, or do you have a certain way of questioning people to understand what their true desires and goals are? Because obviously, without them telling you the full truth, you're not really going to get to the end result that you want, right? So how do you dilly-dally around that? How do you tiptoe around that, should I say?
Yeah, man, that's such a great question, and and it's one that I constantly ask myself, because I'm forever looking. Well, how do I get 1% better? How do I become the best? And one of the big conclusions I've come to is because I went through a stage of really trying to help everybody. I'm like, I know all this stuff, and I just need to help.
Yeah.
And the big thing that I have really learned is that I can't help anybody unless they want that help, unless they ask. And when you're in that frame, this is why I work with business leaders who want to be the best that they can be, because I know when I impact their lives, they then positively impact so many other different people as well. And it's like, well, how do I help more people? And that's one of the ways I'm getting around it. But to answer your question directly about how do I know if someone's lying, once, as you get experience doing this, and you probably have this, mate, even with the podcast, you probably just get to know when people are just waffling. You ask a couple of questions and it's just like there's inconsistencies, and you think, okay, that's kind of not reality. Or what people often do is they won't speak directly; they'll tell you in stories of reality, as opposed to directly saying, well, this is what it is. And then I know, as soon as I hear that and I ask the right questions, if someone's happy to share that with me, I know we're onto a bit of a winner, that they really do want to start making that change. If they don't, it's just not their time. It's not for me to kick somebody to do it. Like, people have to be ready to want to make that change.
I like that. I also like the approach, kind of like attack it from the top and it will filter down to everybody else. And you'll kind of help people as you go along. Really good kind of mindset there, and a good way to filter through and not have to like spend time on every single individual, make changes at the top and see it come through. In terms of kind of success stories, has that happened for you? I mean, I'm not going to ask you for obviously clientele names or whatnot, but maybe some examples that you might have where that kind of shift at that top level was really then filtered down and rallied through to the rest of the masses that might be working at that business. Do you have any sort of success stories you can share with us?
Yeah, so I've got even a bit more context around that. I actually had another business that I was running, which was a
Okay.
personal training education business, where we was looking to qualify personal trainers, but upskill them as an evidence-based coach, which is what I am and which is what you really learn at university. The reason I've made this shift is because I was like, oh, well, I can't actually do a lot about what that coach does when they leave me. And the marketplace was almost not allowing me to do what I wanted because it's pretty much a race to the bottom with that qualification. It's how
Yeah.
quick can people deliver it and can you do it completely online, which I just completely disagree with. Made the shift to business leaders because I was like, right, when I have that impact on somebody, that's what is then going to ripple through to their teams. It's going to ripple through to how they lead. And just for some context, as I said, can't fully mention names, but if you go onto my page, you'll see the kind of people that I work with, and you'll see on the link as well some of the testimonials. But I've worked with people who are head of dental groups. I've worked with people who have they're in dentistry and have 100+ employees, and we're looking at optimizing their health. And the direct impact of that is how they show up as a leader, how are they influencing people around them, how important that they then start to realize that their physical health, mindset, nutrition, everything around that is giving those extra 1% to 30% that they didn't realize was that important. But when they have that shift themselves, they then start to think, well, how important is this? And how much
Yeah.
of my team is missing out on that as well?
So kind of like they see the result, and then obviously it becomes a natural way of their belief, right? And it filters out to everybody else. I think that's the way that it should happen. I think I might be kind of falling victim to the idea of wanting to help everybody as well. But I like the way that you're addressing this. I think I'm going to try to implement that some way in the way that I move forward from here on in. But when it comes to kind of the physical side of things, give me some examples of how you would maybe train someone or coach someone. What do you implement? What does a standard plan look like? We don't have to get into the nitty gritty of it because maybe that's more of your secrets. I don't want to, convey that to the world just yet. And then how does that look in terms of results on a physical level? Then, if we can kind of keep this question going on somewhat, how does that turn into results on a performance level in terms of kind of what the business is doing? So, what does it look like on a physical level? What does that look like when it's done well? And then how does that reflect, let's say, bottom line? So is there any way that you can kind of help us so we can get a bit more of a context when it comes to this?
Yeah, so the secret of what I do, as you alluded to there, is more the application. And people often ask me, like, as a kind of general guideline of or a generic program, and there is no generic program. It always depends on someone's goals. But I'll give you an example of how that works. So when someone onboards with me, we look at how much time they have to allocate to training each week. And majority of the people that I initially work with want to lose weight. So
Yeah.
you'll come and go onto my page, you'll see people who have lost above 60 pounds in 7 months, that they've lost a ridiculous amount of weight because we get the principles right, but it's always guided by the science. So if you ever see weight loss transformations on my page, it's never above 1% of total body mass each week, because that's what the science tells us is a healthy amount of weight to lose whilst facilitating good health, which is something
Nice.
really important to note. With how the program's structured, now, when you get an understanding of how training works, there are general principles every human moves by and every human acts by. And this is what I learned from all the way from elite athletes, all the way to if you just want to get generally fit. When you understand those principles, it's then about narrowing them down into the time that people have available. So I'll give you a
Okay.
brief overview of that. Every single human moves as in a squat movement. So any kind of squat, a hinge movement, which is a deadlift type movement.
Okay.
What you want to do unilateral variations, which is simple single leg stuff. So like a lunge. You want to do an upper body push and a pull horizontally, a push and a pull vertically. And then you then want to challenge the core in multiple different ways. So you want to challenge it extension and flexion, and then rotationally as well. When you
Ah,
tick off all those movements in different time frames, you can condense them down, you can spread them out, split them up as much as you want to. That's matching the NHS's guidelines of resistance training twice a week. It's then about incorporating. So the NHS has a guideline around 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity. But realistically, it's then reverse engineering. Well, what's that person's goal and how do we fit this into their week? So if we're talking about losing weight and they have very little time, we're looking at calorie counting, we're looking at a higher focus on food, and I coach people through the process of changing their diet, changing the nutrition, not so it bores the life out of them, because if you do that, if you just eat chicken and broccoli for 3 months, great, you might lose a lot of weight, but you probably put it all back on because it's boring as sin. And I don't, even as a coach, eat chicken and broccoli because it's boring. It's about having a whole balance that's specific to your life. Same with the training. Once you understand those movements, like, let's put those into reasonable time frames. Let's include cardio into there. And if we're looking at weight loss, for example, as the coach, what I do is I look at physically, what do we need to put into that week for a kilo of weight loss to happen? When that happens, right, brilliant. We've found the kind of rhythm that we need to be at. Let's repeat that. And then it's my job as a coach then to adapt things as we need to. If people need to reduce things, increase things. And when it comes to the mindset, just people tend to have knowledge gaps, limiting beliefs, things that hold them back from taking action. It's then my ability to then coach them through that process as well.
Right.
When it comes to then the influence on business and the measurable outcomes truly are through, I mean, you'd have to probably ask the people that I work with, that they'll always say that there's some kind of increase in revenue, all that kind of stuff. I should definitely start measuring it. I think that's a real fantastic point to note on. Obviously, if you know business, you know it's very, very difficult to, and you understand science as well. It's like, to narrow down and say just physical health improved revenue when there's so many other things going on, it's very difficult. It's almost like you're cherry picking data. And if you you understand science, like, it's very difficult for me to say that, and I'd be lying if I did, and I know that. But holistically, you can see the positive impact as it has, and I don't think there'd be any business leader who would argue that the better they feel, mentally the better they feel, the better impact it has on their business. I think I'd love to ask somebody who disagrees with me on that. Maybe Elon Musk, potentially. I don't know. He seems like he's writing himself off at the minute. I don't know.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think it is very hard to kind of pair those two things together. But I mean, if we're just being real with ourselves, right? Like, if I'm walking around and I'm absolutely ripped, and I'm going into work, I'm going to feel better about it. I'm going to feel more confident with my patients. I'm going to be.
Do you need to be absolutely ripped though? That's one of my questions. And is that aligned with your experience of life and how much you'd be fulfilled? Because that's the thing, because what I tend to hear is people go to those extremes, and that's where they kind of lose it with health and fitness. It's this all or nothing mindset that I typically actually see with dentists, and you might be potentially go with this yourself, mate. It's that if it's not perfect, it's just not good enough. I'm just not going to do it. And that's something that I try to break, because it's like, well, do you need to be I wouldn't say I'm ripped. I kind of enjoy food out. But from my experience of life, I'd say my physical health facilitates me being very fulfilled, both in my business and also in general life.
I love that. I really do. And you put me in my place there, and thank you for that, because it is a problem. I think that a lot of dentists, because of the nature of the work that we do, everything is almost at that state of perfectionism, right? I'll wind that back. If I was in better shape than I am now, I would definitely feel more confident, right? And I think that physical element of just being able to walk by. I'll give you an example. I remember yesterday I was walking through town, really like random, factoid, so to speak. And I just remember going past a glass window to my left, a shop storefront, right? And I just saw a reflection of me in my habitual state of just, slumped over and walking through town and, not thinking much. But I looked over to my left, I was like, geez, man, is that my posture? And is that my weight and my double chin? Just like, obviously, when we're on camera or when we're in front of a mirror and we have time to set ourselves, we try to straighten up as best we can, right? But looking at that, and I was thinking, is that what I look like? And it does knock your confidence a bit. So knowing in my head, if I could have corrected that through maybe work with yourself, for example, it does put you in a better mental mind frame, right? So the results do come from that. I do feel if I know in my heart of hearts I don't look like that, that actually I have worked on my posture, I have lost a bit of weight, I probably look a bit better than I saw myself in that shop front window, right? Then I would feel better with my patients, and that productivity would then come round from that, and that would probably affect my bottom line as well. So quite rightly to your point, it is very hard to kind of pair those two parts of reality together, like your physical and obviously your work rate and what that does for you. But I think in reality, that confidence that you get from it really does help you with your workload. So I would probably, put my hand up and say that if I looked better, looked after myself a bit better, my productivity would probably go through the roof, and there would be a positive correlation between the two. So I totally agree with you. I think the thing that I want to ask you off the back of what you mentioned earlier, kind of the getting the results and then sticking with it, right? How do you ensure that people continue with it? Because I've in the past, without help, unfortunately, dieted or exercised in a certain way, and the max that I've probably been able to maintain is about 6 months. And even if I'm looking good and feeling good, I'll slip up, right? And then begins the dark cycle once again. How do you kind of control that mindset? We've spoken about the physical side of things, right? But how do you control that mindset to ensure people stay on that successful run?
Just want to start by saying, mate, like a massive thank you for your honesty there. There's not a lot of people who have that ability to genuinely be that honest just about how they feel about a certain situation, mate. And in relation to how do people stick on it, it was the question that I kept asking myself many, many years ago. It was like, how, and I think what it came back to for me was like, well, how am I always able to get back to fitness and health? Like, why does that happen for me? So it was more of an internal reflection that I went on. It was like, why does that continuously happen for me? That no matter what happens, I can always maintain and manage health or get back to where I need to be very, very quickly. And the answer that I came to, it was the knowledge that I have that I understand the process. I understand how everything works. So if things don't quite go my way, I don't get frustrated because I understand the underlying mechanisms and I just know exactly what I need to change. So that alleviates a lot of the frustration around fear of, oh, well, if I put a bit of weight on, I know exactly what I need to dial in. And there's no fear around, oh, it's just all going to go to loss. And there's not that as much emotional connection to it because there's such a logical process that I have. So that was the first thing that I worked on giving people. It's like, well, they need that process. They need to understand the full picture. And once they understand that, they're going to have the tools that, whether they're with me or not, to be able to continue that moving forward into the future. The other part, truthfully, comes down to their identity as well. And it's their beliefs around why they think they can and why they think they can't. And one of the big things I work on with the coaching process is helping people see past their limitations of how they currently see their situation, because that's all it is. It's just a result of a process that they've gone through to get to where they are. But what people then do is they label it, oh, this is me. I'm just the kind of person who just doesn't, in fitness and health doesn't work for me. And it's just never quite, I always get injured or something always happens. And it's breaking that with evidence that when you understand the science, when you constantly are reflective around your data, and you have this knowledge of how to apply a process, that you can do whatever you want with your health and fitness and you can maintain it because you've got that, as opposed to being limited by how you feel or by the external factors of the world of time limitations or, stress of business and just not being able to manage things properly.
I'm with you. I like that. I think one thing as well is just kind of before we go into the wrap up. One big thing I'm kind of hearing in all of this, and I'm relating to a lot of in all of this, is kind of the falling off your horse bit, right? And then getting back up and doing it all over again. But that one bit before getting back up and doing it all over again, the dealing with the failure. Now, obviously, we're humans and we all deal with failure, right? But I think it can be a very dark place for a lot of people. I was hearing in your intro, obviously, you spoke about the whole boxing side of things. You must have at one point felt, this is difficult to kind of tear yourself away from that dream that you had of being that boxer to then obviously doing what you're doing now, which is amazing, right? But as a kid, you had that dream, you wanted to do it, you had to tear yourself away from that transition yourself into a career close to it, which is still giving you that same satisfaction or close to that level of satisfaction you wanted. But how do you deal with failure? How do we deal with it when, you know, a client or a person is on a plan or a routine that they set with you, they don't see it through, something's happened, they feel as though they failed, and they go through that kind of that state of almost depression or that dark area? What is the advice you give to people that all of us, in some way, shape, or form, anywhere in life, we have to deal with failure? How do we kind of get back on the horse? What is that thing that drives people to make sure that they're going back onto that route to success and not just giving up?
That is a fantastic question. The first thing that I get people to do is become aware and sit with the emotions that are coming up, to become very, very aware of what emotions is it you're feeling and what are the thoughts that are attached to those emotions, because there's often just a pattern. And for me, I now understand that fear was a big driver of majority of what happened in my life, whether that was boxing, whether that was something I failed at. It was always the feeling of fear and anxiety. It manifests in different ways, doesn't it? It's, you know, it can feel anxiousness, you know, all these different things. And a big realization for me was that this feeling just then drove thoughts. It didn't matter what happened in the external world, because there was lots of people that I knew who'd been through the exact same experiences, but they were having completely different frames of thinking on it and completely different results and completely different, you know, mindsets. And I was like, well, why is that? I was like, it can't be reality, can it? It's got to be something that I must be doing. And when I started to realize that, and it was like, okay, so what's the next step? It's actually become aware of the feeling of fear and then the thoughts that accompany it, and then realize that that's a pattern built up in me as opposed to what's actually happening in the outside world. When you start to become that awareness, you then have so much more power to make different choices. That the fear might still be there, but because you're the awareness as opposed to just the fear and the thought cycle of this is me, this is who I am, and this is just how it's always going to be. When you manage to take that step back and see it for what it is, you can then make different choices despite it. And I think that's my biggest goal. So one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to people, I mean, meditation is a fantastic tool for that. A lot of people have negative associations with meditation. And if you'd have asked me in my boxing days when I was in the rough boxing areas of the world and sparring, you know, some of the nasty people, like, I'd have laughed. If someone has told me about meditation, I'd have laughed. But there is so much neuroscience coming out now proving things that a lot of people were saying thousands of years ago. Which is what I find the most fascinating, that when you train this ability to be aware, you're actually changing activation patterns in your brain that allows you to make different choices, which is what I find the most fascinating.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to have to really start researching that now, because I think with the way that my mind works, it's kind of like, if I have to sit in a place and think about something, I just go into some weird locations. But it's definitely going to be on the radar. We just start researching this. Maybe I'll actually get your advice on it offline when I can, actually, because might be something to look into. But, you know, just to kind of to wrap up, you know, what would be the kind of the parting advice you'd give to any of the listeners across the whole range of what we discussed today?
I think it would be, it's difficult to know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So the first step before you do absolutely anything is to look to educate yourself, look to understand the situation, not from just one perspective, look to gain a couple of perspectives. And that's not me telling you need to take hours and hours of time. That can be done quite quickly, just researching a couple of areas. Everyone listening to this podcast will have a scientific background. They'll understand what it takes to research. They'll understand what it takes to collate scientific data and journal articles. So go out and if you're going to treat your health and fitness and you want to make changes, don't treat it like something that you can just quickly go on YouTube, quickly go on TikTok, get a quick tip from someone that you know. Have that same evidence approach as you do with dentistry, as you do with your health and wellness.
Absolutely love it. Couldn't have said it better myself, my man. That was a great way to wrap that all up. I for one, as always, with all of my guests that have ever come on, feel like I've learned so much. I'm not just saying that willy-nilly. I actually love listening to everybody that comes on. George, actually, genuinely, it's been a massive pleasure, my friend. You've given me a hope to rekindle my love for exercising and sorting myself out. I'm sure our conversations will continue. We can hopefully have you back on in the near future when you have time for it, to discuss things further. Thank you so much for coming on. And for anybody that was listening, if there's anything that you learned from this, feel free to get in touch. I'll leave all of his socials in the link, the description box below. And hopefully you guys can get in touch with George yourself and learn as much as I did or more. So let us all know how your experiences went. And hopefully we'll see you on the next one, guys. Take care. Thanks again, George. See you soon.